Hello, my name is John Stork. I'm with Natural Resource Conservation Services, which is a branch of the United States Department of Agriculture. Today, I'm going to be giving a little presentation about not only the technical assistance that we offer, but also the financial assistance side of our agency through our programs. I have geared this presentation more toward starting and beginning farmers. We have a wide variety of programs that we offer. Some of those might not be eligible to people that are just starting out. So I've kind of geared this more toward people that are just getting going and what's available to them. So the mission of NRCS is helping people help the land. So we want to protect natural resources. We want to help our clients become good stewards of the land, and we want to produce sustainable agricultural operations, not only for this generation, but for future generations as well. So beginning with the technical assistance side of our agency, I'm kind of going to go over how our process works, what to expect, and pretty much everything that we do revolves around our 9-step planning process. And how that usually typically would work, our first step in that process is identifying problems. So that's typically going to be the producer, maybe even some of you after this presentation, calling me, coming into my office, talking to me, and you might already have problems that you know you have. You might come in here and say, John, listen, I got an issue with mud where I'm feeding my cattle, or I know that I have a water quality issue with my cattle having direct access to my pond or my stream, and I want to correct that. That's our first step, is identifying those problems that the producer knows that they have. Our second step is determining objectives. So this would be the landowner saying, I'm going to ask you what your objectives are. I don't want to plan anything that's not going to work for you. I don't want to say, I don't really want to hear what you have to say. I'm going to go out to your farm and I'll identify all the issues and I'll come up with a plan and you're going to implement it. Because it might be a plan for a cow-calf operation and you have horses. So that is why we always take those objectives of the landowner in early in this planning process, so that we know that what we're working with and what we're driving towards. Our third step is we're going to inventory the resources on that farm. So this is typically when we would make a field visit. So we're going to be out on the farm, uh, usually me, maybe one of our other employees meeting with landowners, and we're going to inventory these resources. So we have 7 different categories of natural resources that we deal with. We have soil, water, air, plants, animal, human, and energy, which you can't see, but it's behind me. Um, those are our 7 categories. So we're going to look at each one of those on your particular farm, and we're going to look for any resource concerns that we have there. So it could, with soil, we could have soil erosion, we could have soil compaction. Those are things that we're going to look at, that I will identify and say we have an issue here. And that's our third step. That's inventorying our resources. Um, So our fourth step is analyzing our resource data. So once we come up with the resources that are available on that property, um, that's when we're looking for our resource concerns. If there's a pond there, do we have a water quality concern with that pond? If animals have access to it, um, and we kind of go through each one of those uh, resource concerns from the SWAPAHE. This is where we would analyze those and identify any problems. So for formulating alternatives, that's where we're going to be looking for practices, conservation practices that are going to address those resource concerns. So for instance, that pond that we have where livestock have access to it, we have a water quality issue. An alternative that we may have is fencing that pond off and putting a water tank off of that pond so that the cattle still have water to drink, but that they're not contaminating that water source by standing in it, defecating in it. They'll walk the banks in, walk the dam in, so it's not good for either the pond structure or the pond health. So that's kind of where we pull all those conservation practices that we have at our disposal. We pull them all together and put them in a plan. So for evaluating our alternatives, that's where I would again meet with you. This is what I came up with. These are the conservation plan or practices that I think will address all the natural resource concerns on your farm. And we'll go over them. If you think this won't work for this reason or that won't work for that reason, and that's perfectly okay. And we'll work together to formulate a plan that ultimately works for you, but also meets our needs. The seventh step is making decisions. So that's kind of where we say, all right, we've evaluated all these. This is kind of what we've agreed upon, and this is actually what we'll develop our conservation plans. Will be our final conservation plan here at the seventh step. So we'll have it out. We'll have a map with all the practices on it and what we call a schedule of operations. So it'll have all the conservation practices that we plan to implement on the property, and with dates to be completed on there. Our eighth step is implementing that plan. So this sometimes the producers want to do this on their own, whether it's time constraint, they might not be eligible for programs, but this is where they'll take that plan that we formulated and put it on the ground on their property. And then we have evaluation of that plan. So after everything is completed, all of our conservation practices are on the ground, being used, that's when we'll come in, we'll look at the plan, evaluate it. Is it working? How's it working? Is it perfect? Do we need any improvements to it or modifications? And that kind of wraps up our 9-step planning process. So after that 7th step in the planning process, we've made our decisions. This is what we're going to generate after that. So this is our conservation plan on the right and our conservation plan map on the left. So our conservation plan on the right, what it has is all the conservation practices that we talked about implementing on the farm are going to be on this sheet. It'll have the practice, the field it's going to be in, the planned amount, the date we plan to implement those practices. On the map on the left, it is less detailed as far as amounts and dates, but it shows where those practices are going to be implemented on the farm, or about where they're going to be implemented on the farm. So it just kind of puts it into perspective for you, not just all the numbers that are going to be on your conservation plan, but actually how it's going to be laid out on your farm. So now we're kind of moving into the financial side of our agency and programs that we have to offer to help people implement the conservation practices that we've identified in your conservation plan. Today we're going to be mostly focusing on our environmental quality incentive program. I think that'll be most helpful, especially for this group of beginning farmers. I think that program is going to be the most beneficial for you at this point. So for our general EQIP program, we do, I think we have over 140 conservation practices in our EQIP program. So I'm going to try to hit on the main ones that we use in this area for the typical operations that we have in this area. And I would say more often than not, that's beef cattle operations. We certainly work with other operations, alpacas, horses, sheep, goats, but all of these practices, they're all going to be based around beef cattle operations, but they can also be used with different livestock types as well. What we're trying to do with our rotational grazing systems that we're implementing, um, it's if we go out on an operation and it's one field, one just big giant field, we're oftentimes going to have overgrazed areas, we're going to have undergrazed areas. The distribution is not going to be good. We're going to have compacted areas. Our plant health is not going to be very good. It's going to be depleted. Our regrowth rates are not going to be as great. So when we implement these rotational grazing systems, those are the issues that we're trying to fix. We want a good, sustainable operation that has good grass growth, that's utilizing the entire, all of our available grazing ground. We want to be utilizing that as best as we can. So when we're implementing these rotational grazing systems, obviously the first thing we would need is fence, which is an eligible cost share practice for interior fencing. So this would be fencing that we're using to split large pastures into smaller pastures so we can implement, so we have enough fields that we can implement a rotational grazing system. Anytime we put those interior fences in, we need a water source in each one of those fields. That's where our livestock watering facilities come into play. This is also an eligible cost share practice. So we want to make sure each one of those fields that we make has a water source that's easily accessible and that it's still going to distribute grazing well within that field. In this example, we have watering tanks. These are 2-ball tanks off of city water. We do, depending on the situation we have, we can not only do these fountains, but we can do open tanks as well, either concrete tanks or if you've seen the used equipment tire rubber tanks, we can use those as well. It just depends on the situation. They don't have to be off city water. That's our most reliable water source. So if we have it available, that's what we typically like to use. We also, if the situation calls for it, we can do tanks off of ponds. We can do them off of springs. We don't probably use those as much up in this area just because city water is so readily available. But depending on our situation and our operation, those might also be viable options for us. So even though we don't use these a lot up in this area, I figured I would make a slide for them. But this would be if we did one of those watering tanks off of a spring. This is what it would look like. So in that top left picture there, you can see that's what would be the spring box. So that's where we're capturing that water from that spring. And then it would go from there to a tank. So a lot of times with springs, we typically use open tanks, either concrete tanks or the rubber tire tanks. That's just because of storage capacity. That spring might not fill that tank up as fast, so we want to make sure we have a good capacity there. That way if the herd of livestock comes up and drinks, there's a lot of reserve there as opposed to if they had a smaller, like a 2-ball tank or something like that. So this is another option that we have for watering source for our livestock. We don't use these as much. Typically, if we're using a pond, we'll plant a tank, a watering tank off of that pond, so that the pond will be completely fenced out, and the tank will be it'll be gravity fed down to that tank, so it'll be sitting below the pond. If topography does not allow for that, there are a lot of situations or property lines maybe where we can't get enough fall behind the pond, or it's too steep that we can't plant a tank. We might plan one of these watering rams. And basically how it works, you're going to have an armored area, so that fence is going to be completely, or the pond's going to be completely fenced off. We're going to have one area that we've armored, kind of built up, so we have our geotextile fabric and rock on top of it. It goes down to that pond. It's a controlled access point for those cattle to go down, drink. There's not a lot of room, so hopefully they're not loafing in that area a lot. So it's going to get the cattle down there. They can still drink out of the pond and then back out, but it's not giving them full access to stand and defecate in that pond. It's going to save the structural integrity of the pond. So they're not going to be walking the banks and walking the dam, and so you're not going to have that soil erosion. So it is an option in given situations. So we talked a little bit about interior fencing before to set up rotational grazing. Some other fencing options we have are to fence out or exclude livestock from sensitive areas. So that might be streams, that might be ponds. It could be other conservation practices that we've installed that we want to keep them out of. It could be forest land. Any of those areas where we want to exclude livestock, that we feel like their presence would be detrimental to that area, we have exclusion fence available for those instances. Heavy use areas are another practice that we commonly use. We can use these and use them in conjunction with our rotational grazing system. This is one, especially with the past 2 or 3 winters we've had, how wet it's been, how muddy it's been. We've had a lot of requests for heavy use areas or feeding pads. But basically what these are, it's a geotextile fabric with rock on top of it. We size those according to the number of animal units that are going to be using the heavy use area. These are really used in instances where we're trying to reduce soil erosion, reduce compaction. You know, it's these muddy areas are not good for animal health either, but it's a very common practice we use. We'll not only use these heavy use areas for our feeding areas, but these will also go around our watering tanks. If we have a stream crossing, we'll use them for that. So these in the limited access ramps for the ponds. So we actually use those heavy use areas in different scenarios aside from just feeding. But the feeding areas are definitely our most common area to use those heavy use areas. So if we have an area that we either have livestock or equipment crossing a stream, a lot of times we'll have eroded banks, mud issues, things like that, soil erosion. So we'll implement these stream crossings. It's basically an armored stretch across the creek. We try to get it up out of the floodplain. And these are designed for livestock access to cross or equipment to cross. If you got to get your tractor, hay wagon across. That's how these are designed. We don't use a lot of these, but in instances where it's necessary to cross a stream, we can implement this practice to achieve that goal. So forage and biomass plantings are another pretty common practice for us to use. We can use these if we're converting ground from crop ground to pasture hayland. If a pasture is dominated by endophyte infected tall fescue, we can also do some frost seeding of clovers, but those do have to be on slopes that are greater than D, so that's more hilly ground. We can definitely frost seed clover if it's needed in those areas. Our animal waste storage facilities. These are, I'll talk about our comprehensive nutrient management plans in a few more slides, but those will need to be completed before we can install these. But as you can see, we have some different styles. The style in the upper right hand corner, we actually don't use that style anymore. All of ours are covered now, so they'd be more like the two on the left. But we use those in conjunction a lot with feeding areas. So you'll have a feeding area right next to your waste storage facility, so it's easy to push that manure right in there. We'll size those for certain lengths of time and for the animal units. And a lot of those are specified in that comprehensive nutrient management plan that you'll be getting prior to installing a waste storage facility. So we also have programs that address forest land and wildlife concerns. For our forest land programs, typically we'll have the first thing you'll need to do is call Division of Forestry, and they will set you up with a forester to come out to your property. And what they'll do is they'll look over the entire forest, and they will write you a forage stewardship plan. And what that forage stewardship plan is going to tell you is what you need to do to manage that forest. And all the needs will be in that plan. Once you have that plan, you can come to me and say, hey, John, listen, I had the forester out there. They wrote this plan for me. Now what? We'll take those, whatever practices are in there, like if we have brush management, forest stand improvement, if that's recommended in that plan, those are the practices that we will then submit in our application for cost share funding. Hopefully we get approved for those. It's basically just an incentive payment to get that stuff done. But that is typically how our forest land conservation programs go. Just a little bit more information on the brush management. So as you can see, there's some of the species it covers: bush honeysuckle, multiflora rose, autumn olive, privet, tree of heaven. Those are the main invasive species that you're going to find up this way. So forest stand improvement, basically what that is removal of woody vegetation, and this is to promote beneficial tree species. So this might be killing some trees that are crowding, undesirable species that are crowding beneficial species. There's two examples here on the slide. On the left is a hack and squirt method, so you're going to be using a hatchet, hacking into the tree, then spraying your herbicide directly into that. On the right side of the slide is a double girdle, so that's basically taking a chainsaw, going around the tree twice, and that will kill that tree standing. So for these practices, Division of Forestry will come out and mark the trees that need to be removed or killed, and then it is upon the landowner to then go through and do the work to either kill those trees by either of the methods mentioned, and it will probably typically be specified, if you're approved for cost share funding, it'll be specified in job sheets that you receive. Conservation cover, it's more of a wildlife program or practice for wildlife, but a lot of times these range from anything from native grass stands with a mix of forbs in them, pollinator habitats, things like that. We've used these quite a bit in recent years, especially for pollinator habitat. They've been very, very popular. So this is an example of one of those shower water developments for wildlife. They are not very deep. They're usually about 16 or so inches deep. And they're not meant for, recreational use or fishing or anything like that. Just solely meant for wildlife watering holes. So if you're in vegetable production, this is probably a good practice for you. This is a seasonal high tunnel. The purpose of this practice is to extend your growing season, so it'll be earlier into the spring, later into the fall. The really nice thing about it is it's going to, if you're trying to be that first to market, that's where a lot of your money's going to come from. This seasonal high tunnel could certainly help you do that. So if you think it would be something that you're interested in, I definitely recommend giving me a call, and we'll take a look at it, see, what we have eligibility-wise, and we'll go from there. So this is that comprehensive nutrient management plan I was talking about earlier. If you're wanting one of those waste storage facilities, this is what you'll need before that. So the comprehensive nutrient management plan is what will specify that you do in fact have a need for a waste storage facility. These plans are not written by NRCS, they're actually written by technical service providers. So the landowner will be in charge of, we do have a list of technical service providers that we can give to you, and you can obviously look through there, pick one out, call a few of them, see who has the best price. But you'll pick one of the TSPs from that list. They will write this plan for you. That plan is going to be what specifies your needs on the farm as far as nutrient management. So it might specify a waste storage facility and it might not. And it's going to take into consideration all the other factors on your farm as well. It's an overall comprehensive nutrient management plan for your farm. These are available for cost share funding, so they are relatively expensive, but you can apply through our cost share program and hopefully get a good chunk of that cost reimbursed for you, so that you don't have to bear the whole weight of the plan. So for our EQIP program, it is continuous sign up. We'll take applications any time of the year. At this point, I'm assuming that we've already met. We already have a conservation plan together. So when you're ready to put that stuff on the ground, apply for cost share funding, come in here. We'll fill out an application or applications, depending on exactly what we're wanting to do. We'll usually hold those applications. We typically only have one funding opportunity per year. So we'll hold those applications until that time, and then we'll rank those applications to see whether or not you got approved through this application, EQIP or one of our other programs. It is important to note this is a program. It's not first come first serve, so that when you put in your application really doesn't matter at all. It's purely based on the resource concerns that you're addressing with your application. So state cost share is another potential source for cost share funding. As the name would imply, these funds come from the state. So it's not a federal program, but our agency does typically take care of the technical side of this program. A lot of the practices that are eligible in state cost share are also available in EQIP. So I won't go into each individual practice that's available through state cost share. Just know that a lot of those programs are mirrored in the federal program. It's just another source of funding. It's set up a little bit differently than the federal program. There's usually more funding opportunities throughout the year. You might have 3 or 4 as opposed to the one with the federal program. Your lifespan on these practices or on this state cost share program is going to be 1 year as opposed to the federal program, which might be multi-year. But especially for those projects that are time sensitive, this might be a good option. It'll probably give you a little bit better chance to get that on the ground quicker, project done. You know, if you're really wanting to get something done, this might be a good option for you. So our conservation stewardship program is another program that we have available. This is probably not a program for a lot of beginning farmers, but it is something to work towards, so I figured I'd throw it in here. This program is really geared towards people who are at the top level of conservation stewardship. So they either have most or all of their resource concerns addressed on their farm. For these, there are enhancements that you'll have to do through this program for each land use. It's usually one enhancement per land use. The contract length is 5 years, and your annual payments will be based on your level of conservation stewardship for each one of those land uses. This program also, it's a continuous sign-up, so we'll take the application at any time, and we typically have 1 round of funding per year. Farm dump cleanup. This actually is not a program that I administer. This is a county program, but I figured it might be really helpful, especially for people starting out, especially if you just bought a farm. You might run into this issue, so I figured I'd throw this in here so you knew this resource was available. The County Conservation District does have a farm dump cleanup. I think they've actually renamed it to heavy materials removal or something along those lines. But basically, this is a program that's geared to give landowners an incentive to clean up some of the dumps on their farms. A lot of times, especially older farms, they found the closest hauler to the house and started filling it with trash. And this program is meant to address that. So if you might have one of these areas, or you think this, you might have a farm that would be eligible for this program, I'd recommend calling our office, and either I can steer you in the right direction and get you with who you need to talk to for this program. And they do. I don't remember exactly what the cap is on it. It's probably around $1,800 to $2,000. It's a 75% reimbursement. So if you've listened to this presentation, it sounds interesting to you, you think you can use some of these conservation practices on your farm, your next step is to talk to me. So I have my contact information up here in a minute. You can call me, you can email me, you can come in and visit me in my office, and all you'll need to bring is your objectives, and we'll go from there. So we'll make site visit. Um, we will come up with a conservation plan that both of us agree on. Once we have that conservation plan, if you think you can implement it on your own, that's great. If you think you might need some cost share assistance on that project, that's when we'll fill out those applications and get those entered. The other thing you'll need to do, you will have to have updated farm records with Farm Service Agency. They are also a branch of United States Department of Agriculture. They're right here in the bottom floor of the Extension office. You can run down there, give them a call, talk to them, tell them that you needed updated farm records and updated eligibility, and they will get you taken care of there. But you'll have to have that to be eligible for these cost share programs. So I wanted to thank you for sitting in on this presentation. I hope it wasn't too long or boring or complicated. I hope it gave you a better understanding of what it is that Natural Resource Conservation Services does and the programs available to you, especially as beginning farmers. This is my first online presentation. I thought it went pretty well. I hope I don't have to do too many more of them. I hope we can get back to in-person meetings soon. But I have my contact information up here. I think you can pause this video and write it all down if you need to. If not, my office is right here in the Boone County Extension office. I'm on the bottom floor. My number's up there and with my direct extension. My email's not on there, but it is my first dot last name at usda.gov. So you can call, email me, or come in here into my office. Any three is great. We did only scratch the surface of conservation practices that we offer, so I don't want you to watch this and think, well, none of those sounded, like they work on my farm. There's a lot more that we have to offer, especially if you're in row crop production or organic production. We didn't hit very much on those practices, but if anything, if you think, like I said, we're a technical assistance agency first, so if you think there's something that I could just give you a little insight on, I'd be more than happy to. We'll go from anything from one meeting in my office to, if it stretches out over 3 years, that's great too. Some of our bigger projects do, but I just want to thank you again for hanging in there, and I hope this was helpful to you, and I hope to be hearing from some of you soon. Thanks.